Okay, let me start recording. So let's see. Let's see. So yeah, usually we have some agenda, but today it looks like there were no topics to discuss. So let me share my screen and we'll just go through the items that we have. Okay. So first of all, a few pull requests slash proposals have been merged. And I can go through some of them. So what we have, proposal for MD Magento developed extension project structure. So yeah, basically Magento developed extensions are actually the same modules or packages which are developed by Magento and are included as part of the Magento meta package, Magento product, but they are developed in a separate repository, so we need a specific procedure for that. So an example is MSI, one of the community projects, and we also have Page Builder, which is no, I don't have anything beeping. Is it everybody hearing it? I don't have anything beeping. Okay, and we have Page Builder, which is part of, which will be part of Magento Commerce, and both of them are developed in separate repositories. So we wanted to unify the file structure, and here Alex described how exactly those repositories can be combined in order to develop, if you want to work on both Magento Core and let's say MSI as a developer, for example, as a contributor or for Magento developer. So what do you do? For now, the solution is the recommended solution is to use path type repository in Composer. So you can have, for example, MSI in a separate folder, staying somewhere near Magento. Right now, as a workaround, it should be inside of the Magento root folder because there is one issue with templates which do not allow files being outside of the Magento root folder. So right now, you put MSI inside Magento, and then in composer.json specify repository of type path pointing to that directory, and then just require the MSI, and then Composer will be able to just install MSI as a package, and then you can basically develop with it. So as far as I know, under Linux systems or Mac, I think as well, all the files will be symlinks, so you can basically develop in your project, and then you can just push your changes. Anything? Somebody, any comments around that? Can you hear me, or is it still some noise that? Okay, hopefully you can hear me. Okay, that was one of the pull requests that we merged. Another one is it's more related to just organization of this repository. That's strange. Okay, I think it was merged, but nothing changed. Okay, I'll need to review. So basically, the idea of this pull request was to remove the proposals folder at all. So we should have only design documents. And I think this is how it's described here. I will review why there is still proposals folder. Looks like something didn't merge well. Okay, what else we have? MFTF tests versioning. So I don't think this one impacts impacts anybody, but the idea is to have, so we are moving towards, actually we've already moved towards having tests inside modules, and then MFTF tests, for example, with Magento release pipeline, tests will be extracted into separate packages, and they will be versioned. And here, this proposal, this document describes how, what means this versioning for the tests. So like there are details on different XML nodes and what can happen with them. So that's interesting if you are writing MFTF tests, which you should do probably. Okay, what else? 7 days ago. So yeah, there was one discussion actually around couple of classes that we have. One is a model abstract extensible model, and another is API abstract extensible object, right? And which of those should be used for creating extension attributes. So right now, one of them is marked with an API, abstract extensible model, I think, right? No, object, right? Abstract extensible object. So as there were not many comments into why this should change, we keep it as is. So this class is an API, public API, so you should use this one, and it has fewer methods, so you don't inherit too many things that you actually may not need.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I would like to add a little bit to this pull request. So right now, I'm still talking to some community members and discussing how they actually use these classes and what they use for inheritance. And it seems like most people either don't know about the existence of objects, or they just use, or basically they use them. So for now, I'm leaning towards just deprecating existing model and keeping objects as API. But there is still an undergoing discussion, and most likely there will be another PR in coming weeks.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Alex. Okay, I think that's all what was happening in the last couple of weeks. So what we have opened, Andrew is still working on JS mixins. So yeah, we'll need to scan what we have on Marketplace just to make sure that what Andrew proposes makes sense based on that. What else? ElasticSearch. We have all. Okay. Volodya, do you know if Igor will be able to look into this proposal? We were asking him to look into it. Because I know that Igor Melnikov reviewed, but it would be good if Igor Nyalo could look as well. But I'm not sure what's his status on this. Volodymyr, here. If you're talking, we don't hear you. Okay, I'll try to follow up again on this proposal. So, as I know, there is some feedback from Igor Melnikov, but yeah, we'd like.
Yeah. Hi guys. Sorry, was issue with audio. So yes, Igor Minialo promised to look at this pull request this week. He's now busy with finalizing MSI for next phase of regression. He promised to finish this review till the end of the week. So for now, we have this Igor Melnikov discussion and trying to find a solution. What is the better approach I actually described not the optimal XML structure and which is not pretty consistent with most XML configuration in Magento, but consistent with that part of existing configuration in Elasticsearch configuration XML file. And we would want to discuss with what solution we would like to proceed. Do we need to this extended configuration but not consistent with the most part of Magento? Or we would like to deprecate existing XML configuration for Elasticsearch and introduce new ones that will be consistent with all other XML types, configuration types of Magento. So if someone have opinions on this, please join to the review and comment.
Do you want to discuss it now, like what exactly is not consistent?
So the main concern is the approach, how configuration described per language. So for now, Elasticsearch configuration introduce not standard, not strictly declared elements for each locale, and the default element that holds the default configuration, and those elements binded to locale holds the configuration of everything else, all other properties. So, but this is not lead to not really strict schema, and if you follow the XML spirit and best practices, those should be not the element but attributes of some configuration. Like this is main concern, and like everything else is details.
Okay, so you mentioned that it's not so strict with current. The schema is not so strict, right? We cannot define strict schema. Okay, sounds like.
Yeah, but in the same time, introduction of some strict schema would be very verbose. But as we'll introduce some general elements and have a lot of tied attributes declared, and this would be very verbose. So.
But it's, I mean, is it like what I'm looking at right now?
Yeah, this is what is.
Yeah, this is what Igor proposes, as I understand.
Yeah, this is like more verbose, but more consistent with other part of XML of Magento configuration.
But why is it more verbose? I think it defines the same information here. I don't think it's more verbose. It's just everything is in attributes.
When I talking that it's more verbose, that I mean that all elements will have. If you will scroll down a little bit, so all elements will have those attributes like name type, I'm not sure what is discard punctuation.
But I mean, it's the same information that you put in the nodes right now, correct? So you either have these attributes or you will have nodes.
Actually, no, because each tokenizer may have own properties, and it's like it's hard to declare with attributes. So it would be we will need to introduce some general element like parameter option or something like this, and describe it for each possible parameter, because we will not be able to describe all possible tokens and filters and their parameters for Elasticsearch.
Okay, so it seems for me it doesn't matter what the scheme will be. You still cannot make it strict, very strict. It doesn't matter whether it will be attributes or nodes, from like what I understand from what you said. Okay, so I guess, yeah, we'll need to look into details. So you discuss it with Igor Melnikov, right? And you will probably be discussing it with Igor Minyailo, as I understand. Okay.
Sorry, Volodymyr. I have a question regarding this. Can be this configuration will be configured on Elasticsearch level, not in Magento?
As we generate from Magento in the index configuration, settings of indexes in Elasticsearch that search is created, and some of these properties are used for creating queries. So this is like those properties needed to properly configure Elasticsearch, but this job is done by Magento.
So answering my question, no, it's not possible.
What exactly not possible?
To configure this configuration on Elasticsearch, for example, some template or something like this.
It definitely will change the whole way how we do it right now, so it would be backward incompatible.
So we already have this configuration and you only extend it, yeah?
Yes, we need configurations that configure stopwords list, that configure steamer, but for another community project, we also need to more extended features to configure tokenizer and token filters and char filters. Because the default is not suitable for Japanese language or, for example, for Chinese language. They need to use a specific tokenizer and analyzers.
So we cannot specialize only local in our Magento queries and configure all these filters and tokenizer on Elasticsearch. Yep.
Sorry, not sure that I understand you.
So my question is it possible to configure in Magento requests only local or in queries and configure tokenizers, filters, and other settings on Elasticsearch in Elasticsearch?
As I can see from the code, this is not possible. So
we can change context. So the question is it possible technically? So we just configure on Magento, we remove all this configuration at all from the code and move all the configuration to Elasticsearch and just set in our queries the locale.
This is like, it's possible solution, but it's totally will change the approach how we work with Elasticsearch. For now, Magento creates all the indexes in Elasticsearch. So Magento provides what configuration of indexes, what settings of indexes should be used.
And actually, is this problem because it's not allowed to configure language and languages and setting for this, yeah? So maybe better to remove this from Magento and allow this configuration on server level, not on Magento.
It might be the good solution, but I believe this is like more wide and complex question. And in my proposal, I'm just trying to solve particular issue with inability to configure tokenizer and token and char filters and provide this possibility with as less changes as possible.
Okay.
I don't think for this task we don't have strong reason to review the whole principles how we work with Elasticsearch.
Okay.
If you see some reasons to make this work, I believe we may proceed with it. But for now, from my side, from project of Japanese localization, we don't have stronger argumentation to make such big changes.
I believe the most reason is simplify our code. Why we need to manage it on Magento if we do not do it? Okay, but it's a different question. Okay.
Okay, guys, sit together, discuss, and yeah, involve Igor, and let's see where it moves in 1 week, probably. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, what else do we have? Draft for correct operation. Okay, so it's GraphQL, and I guess it's in progress. So I think we were discussing with Alex that we can merge this at some point, right? At some point soon, and then like close the ongoing discussion. So merge this pull request and then create smaller pull requests to update the document. So we don't have just one pull request that stays for a long time here, but we'll have a set of smaller pull requests to update it, right?
Yeah, so in this case, anybody who's interested in schema for checkout in GraphQL, please go ahead and review it now before we merge it. And later we will just modify or add new pieces of schema.
Mm-hmm. Do you have open questions for this schema, or is it ready for merging?
There are some comments in schema, which if somebody is interested to review, they can just look through code review and look for comments. And in comments, sometimes I ask questions. If you can pay attention to those, at least that would be helpful.
I have another question. Is this work around this should be included in 2.3 or not?
No, this is ongoing work. I mean, like 2.3.0, no, but 2.3.1, maybe.
Okay.
So it can be included into any release, basically, because it is backward compatible changes, and we don't have any specific dates completed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, what else?
Hey, try refreshing it. Whoa.
Okay. Okay, one more GraphQL.
We can address this very briefly because it's a longer conversation and this is quite preliminary. I brought this up in the past and...
James, sorry, can you share your screen so I will switch to the notes and we'll be writing down some.
Oh, sure. Just a moment. Let me switch myself to the proposal. And sharing my screen on the proposal. Okay, can you guys see it? Okay. Let me try to remember how I'm supposed to move this stupid bar. There we go. More readable?
I don't know, I can read.
Okay, good. This is a brief summary. The need that we're identifying as we speak with the Adobe Experience Manager and CIF people and the SPA editor people is that there is some duplication of features in their systems that they want us to integrate with and in our page builder system. And I don't anticipate that one system will be deprecated in favor of the other, but in clients that might consume data from multiple systems, we want to avoid having those clients need to have multiple fetching and display strategies for them. So as part of our initial draft of an implementation for page builder support in PWA, I wrote a GraphQL interface that is meant to perform sort of two subsequent calls in serial, and one is to recursively descend into a tree of rich content nodes and determine what their implementation and role should be. And then to perform a subsequent get, which would be very cached, in order to obtain both the data for those subtypes and the logic and component implementations for displaying them. Very briefly, this is the interface. I left off the final curly brace. it is an interface which all other types of nodes like columns and rows, etc., would implement. There's more detail in the proposal itself. And it's recursive, it has children. GraphQL can't do arbitrary recursion, so for each layer of recursion you have to specify in the query. And this is intentional because in a progressive web app, you don't want to let the server content specify how much data you end up downloading. Instead, we can limit the amount of data that we download to a certain set of layers and then progressively dive deeper into a very complex document. And so if you made a request initially, you might just declare a fragment so that you could reuse it and then request one layer of children. And then it would respond perhaps with something indicating that the role of the parent node is column, that it has a tree depth of 4, that here are some assets that are in descendants of the tree. This would be rolled up and aggregated for the PWA to begin doing preload of, and then the descendant roles is similar in that it is a hint for the PWA to begin preloading these components, and then it declares the components. Again, because the query was against the interface, it doesn't get any particular unique configuration values for those, but in the subsequent query, it would receive them. So, put more broadly, we need to integrate with things like Coral UI, ultimately, which is a set of web components driven by JavaScript. And we need to integrate with Adobe's either newer or older thing, I can't really tell, Granite UI, implemented again as JavaScript, which then produces a set of components for display. The one thing that those things all have in common is that they're trees, and so we could potentially use this visual content node to describe a generic tree. This is a more broad sort of discussion of what such implementations and extended types that implement the visual content node might look like. So you could obtain the column and then in parallel render the HTML fallback text so that there can be an initial meaningful paint, and then preload the necessary data, and then in parallel load the necessary logic and run a subsequent query once the logic has come down to explain how that query takes place. And then here you do as much introspection as the, as much recursion as the implementation in particular says that it needs. For page builder column config or for page builder tabs, its associated query might say, well, I want to do 4 layers of recursion because that's typically the depth of such a component. And leaf nodes might not do any recursion at all. So this does seem to require extra requests, but I think that it also guarantees the nature of results, and the requests for follow-up information are necessary in order for us to adhere to the most cross-compatible protocol. I think it's a good way of describing and defining this information, and it would be easy to use it as a transmission format and to retain the fallback-friendly storage format that Page Builder currently uses. So I know that the GraphQL team is not working locally mostly, but I'm proposing this at an architecture level to see if it's something that fits in with our vision and our roadmap.
So if a client does not have knowledge about how nesting level, how to get the nesting level, might be better to not use nested levels, but only flat structure and rebuild the tree on client.
So you're saying we would receive an array of nodes with reference pointers and then assemble it into a tree?
Yep, exactly.
I like that, but one use case that I envisioned was that we wanted to turn the sort of subsequent requests and responses into a feature. The intent of PWA is to progressively load content and functionality, and the intent of Page Builder is to provide a way to make content of arbitrary complexity and appearance. Best practices for PWAs say that pages should be simple, with little depth. You shouldn't have HTML that goes many, many layers deep and then renders videos and etc. But because business users are allowed the freedom to create their own UIs, and the various tools that create those UIs may generate HTML of arbitrary depth, I think that having there be a controllable amount of recursion would be good. And it could still come back as an array potentially, if there's other advantages to that. But if your suggestion is to allow us to download an entire tree of content definitions, then in my imagined implementation, we wouldn't do that, and we wouldn't do it on purpose. So, for instance, if the author has written something that is 8 or 9 or 10 layers deep, then if the PWA's interface fetching logic only fetches 2 or 3 layers, then the client might see the data loading from the outside in, or the content loading from the outside in, which is a best practice actually, because it's much better than loading from the top down and then causing scroll problems. So I think that's good, but it's also something that will be hard to demonstrate until we have a proof of concept, which could be done. This could be thrown together.
Actually, there another possibility. You can use nesting depth level as filter for this array. So it's still possible to not download all the tree and reconstruct it on client side.
So what we would do is filter against depth being, we would use the filter type input standard that we're doing to say like filter less than, so something like, I guess you can't see it. Here. I've got that right. That's you, right, Andre?
Yeah.
Okay, so something like that?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and then you'd receive nodes and then put them back together on the client.
Yep.
It's mildly more expensive on the client, but only logarithmically, I mean, to the depth of the tree, I suppose.
Yeah, but I believe it's not so expensive because it's pretty easy.
I'm sorry, I lost you. Can anyone else hear him?
Yeah, also don't hear.
Oh no, Andre, we lost you. I'm going to try to write up his.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, are you here? Can you repeat?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you were quiet for a little bit. Your connection cut out.
So I believe this is better because you can use any type of structure. If you need to all nodes, you can request it. If you need on subset of nodes, you also can request it. And you need to specify is like nested, because actually if you try to introduce nested, you need to pretty structure, because you also need to specify different type of nodes on every level. in the request.
Yeah, the one consequence of my proposal is that queries end up potentially having a lot of text in them. That's true. That's certainly true. And partly that was because I wanted to make sure that the implementations of things like column, etc., were actually in the type system rather than being somehow blobbed into the type system with like serialized JSON or something. I didn't want to do that. So I wanted you to be able to, once you understood that something had a role of accordion and that you knew that that meant the schema had something called page builder accordion or something, that you could request, or page builder column, you could request these actual properties. And in an array, you could continue to do that, but you would still have to have this, and perhaps you would just append to a local copy of a GraphQL document these fragments as you learn the new type fragments progressively from downloading new things. So then, yeah, that's an idea. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Okay. So that makes for a smaller query going up the line from the client. Are there any other advantages or disadvantages to that approach?
It's hard to say. No.
Yeah. One thing I think about is that if you are looking for a particular node, you can filter on ID. If you are looking for descendants of a node, then it seems a bit awkward that you would have to, you'd have to do something like you know,
Actually, this approach also allows to load the deepest level just with this the same query, just to specify root node, and you can't load just some leaf of tree and render this as asynchronous, for example. Because previous API do not, you need to specify some what I believe this the same, but is this I believe more natural to specify, for example, start render from this root element.
Right, which is what I'm trying to do here is I mean, if you're saying, so if you're saying so descendants, right, or nodes, then there would have to be two filters. There would have to be an and I always forget how we like to do that. Root node, ID, EQ, right? Something like that.
Yep. Yep.
Or, you know, probably. So, okay. And then once that's done, though, the root node may have its own metadata, but it's also possible that we can make the statement that root nodes have no metadata, that they're simply abstract containers, and then we don't need to get any metadata from this specific root node itself.
Yep.
Okay, so that's a possibility, and then, yeah, then we can specify the depth. Yeah, that's a thing we could do. And then we could shorten the queries. I think we could certainly request a very small amount of data and then increase this depth. but like whatever is the manager object that performs these queries, as it successively downloads the implementation of, you know, column and accordion and whatever, then it actually has to mutate this GraphQL query to add fragments, you know, fragment, you know.
Okay, guys, so will you follow up on this?
Yeah, I mean, we can follow up, absolutely.
Yeah, and if you're interested, please review. I also added
Yes.
Igor Melnikov and Alex to the reviewers. Igor is absent right now. He will be back next week, just for your information. But yeah, let's just follow up on this.
Okay. I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much, Olga.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Okay, let's see what else we have. Okay, so we still have one pull request from the cloud team. And Andrei, are you looking into it, or do we need Anton to? What do we need to finalize this one?
Actually, is I believe this needs to be reviewed by Anton Kaplan, not by me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Okay, I'll ping him. Okay, and sale operation, I also remember I was asking Anton to look at it. Okay, I'll ping Anton about those two. And okay, looks like we looked through the pull requests. Okay, good. Anything else? Then that's it. James, just in case, send your pull requests earlier, because next time this thing can be just cancelled if there will be no agenda. But yeah, it's good that we discussed it.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, then thanks all, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.